to voters to buy votes.
Based on your assessment, I mean, you've assessed the entire electoral value chain. It sounds like you're more or less impressed with INEC's conduct, but then we hear that INEC was supposed to have partnered with the EFCC, for example, to stop vote buying processes. Did you see any EFCC agents on ground? Did you see any agents that were supposed to, deal with this particular issue?
Well, I worry about the EFCC's participation in this because, again, we have to look at the politics of what is going on. I think really what you need to have is a situation where you have a unit of the police itself doing this. Or, again, we've been advocating the creation of an electoral offences commission. In the long term, that's where this country needs to go to be able to deal with this, which the electoral offences commission would be an independent commission. It would be made up of people who understand the specific role they have to go out and implement and know that they are not aligned to any of the political parties and do not take those instructions. I think that given some of the issues regarding the perception by the opposition about the roles of government agencies, we really need to have an independent agency that is well trusted, well respected by Nigerians to be able to deal with the issue of vote buying and beyond that, abuse of the Electoral Act and all the offenses contained therein.
It seems that this kind of vote buying process that was going on, it sounds almost as though it was completely separated from the actual process of the election in some way. In the sense that you've said, INEC has done well, that the security agencies, from your vantage point, were not favoring one over the other. But at the same time, whose responsibility is it to ensure that vote buying isn't going on? And can we commend these other bodies if this is effectively continuing without any kind of stoppage?
I think let's discuss the police, for example, and the security agencies. We were very worried about the huge deployments, 30,000 police, and of course the other agencies, the army, the civil defense.
Yeah, well, we'll come to that in a moment.
All of that deployment. But in terms of who apprehends, I think the police goes to the election, deploying unarmed personnel to the polling units, and then the armed personnel are far away from the units, but ready to respond when called in. And I don't think that the policemen whose job at the polling unit is primarily to maintain law and order in the polling unit have been trained or equipped to deal with this added responsibility of monitoring, apprehending, and dealing with vote buying. They didn't go to the polling units with that responsibility.
So ahead of the 2019 general elections, or Oshun is even coming sooner than that, in your mind, if I'm getting you correctly, there needs to be some sort of specialized training, specialized emphasis placed on how to stop vote buying on election day or even before?
I think there needs to be a special response by Nigeria to the issue of vote buying. I think what we saw in Ekiti is a major threat to our democracy, major threat to development in this country. Government officials, people get elected into office, they do not deliver on development, they take money from the public purse, wait for election day, and whether they delivered or not, they try to buy the votes.
But how should that affect the legitimacy of this vote? If we understand, and this is not a PDP or APC issue, if we understand that this was going on such a massive scale and it wasn't being stopped, at what point does this affect the credibility of the vote when we say, we hear observers say it was peaceful, it was free and fair, but yet we know all of this was going on? Does that affect the legitimacy of the result in any way in your mind?
I think observers, like I said, are looking at the process. They've looked at INEC's delivery. They are satisfied that there are improvements on INEC delivery. I think the issue of legitimacy becomes the big question. If the votes are tainted by purchase of them, then I think it goes to the larger issue of the legitimacy of elections in this country, and we must examine that.
So let's go to, the final conduct, because, of course, it's a process. There will be the deployment, and then there will be the actual voting, and then collation, which is where a lot of people used to worry. In the past, people used to say that's when the figures, I mean, at the polling centers, they were okay because the voters were there to monitor. But when you now go to the racks and then maybe subsequently to the local government and to the state collation center, they see some magical figures appearing. INEC had said that for these elections, they were going to be transmitting the figures as soon as the elections were conducted. Was that what you saw?
I think you do have an improved process whereby INEC puts out what it's called the people's results on the polling unit. It's pasted. I think there are different elements to this election, and I think that political parties need to go to the elections prepared to capture evidence. The polling units, we go there as observers. We take pictures of the results at the polling units. Of course, we try to issue our reports even before the election results are put out so that we're not influenced by the results that come out. We are very much concerned about the process. Looking at what happened, we did see polling unit results pasted. The transmission from the polling unit to INEC's headquarters in terms of the polling unit results, which enables the INEC headquarters to actually get a full glimpse of the results well ahead of the collation on the field. That is working for INEC at the headquarters. What we as civil society, as observers, are advocating is that that process should be made transparent and accessible to CSOs, so that in INEC's situation room in Abuja, it should be possible that observers are there, seeing INEC receive those results and confirm in terms of aligning it with what is being collated, that this is correct. Right now, it's only INEC that can say, oh, we have seen the results from the polling units in our situation room, and we are waiting for the paper trail to confirm that this is correct. We can't correct.
So as it stands, you cannot corroborate INEC's, you know, we don't know, INEC hasn't come out to say that was what they deployed in this election, but that was what they said they were going to, you know, do for
as observers, we can't corroborate that process, but we know that INEC says that that is what it does. We know that that works for INEC, but what we are saying is that this should be made transparent so that observers and even party agents sitting in INEC situation room can use that to corroborate the paper trail and the results being compiled from the field. And unless INEC does this, there would still be disputations about election results.
Which we're already beginning to see. Some, you know, the major party, the PDP, is rejecting, you know, the results of the elections. But what you saw, I mean, what you were able, the pictures you were able to take and the figures you were able to collate, did it match largely with what INEC had?
Well, we do have, as part of Situation Room, an organization which works on what is called the Parallel Voter Tabulation, PVT, which is headed by NDI and YAGA. It's a process that they both work on. And that PVT process indicated a corroboration of the result that INEC announced. And they have issued a report on this, and I'm sure that that report is available publicly.
Let's quickly touch on security then. You had, I mean, a lot of civil society organizations, including the Situation Room, had raised an alarm. I mean, they were concerned about the number of policemen, 30,000 of them being deployed to Ekiti. But watching my colleague's program, I think it was Sharon's program, some of the civil society organizations say that the policemen they saw on the ground you know, did not quite tally with the number that they heard was going to be deployed. Was that your experience as well?
I think we were alarmed by the numbers, not just from the police, the army, civil defense, even road safety, immigration. We were very alarmed with those numbers. By the time you put all of it together, it's about 40,000 or slightly more. This is alarming for a state election where you have less than 3,000 polling units. And that worry was much more about ensuring that the police, the security services do not frighten away voters by intimidating presence. But on election day, we did see police in virtually every polling unit. We did see civil behavior on the part of the police. We did meet with the police on the eve of the elections to discuss their deployment plan. They did explain how this was going to work, which was 4 policemen per polling unit, and by the time the calculation is done, it's nearly 9,000 in terms of the polling unit presence. And they provided further explanation to talk about the police deployment to strategic state institutions that need to be protected on election day. I do not think that we need the numbers of security that was deployed. And I must make the point also, I do not think under any circumstance that we need the army deployed to the field on election day. If the army wants to be involved in providing backup for police, I think that should be that if you do not have the police at strategic state institutions, they can be deployed to defend whether it's the central bank or ministries or agencies of government, but certainly not in any way be a backup for election duties. I think this is wrong. I think this sends wrong signals to citizens, and I think it's frightening, and I don't think this country needs to spend the amount of resources it spends on elections.
We have to thank you most kindly for coming on Sunrise Daily, Mr. Nwankwo.